I'm muted. Good morning, everyone, on our last morning together. And thank you, Christina, Denise, and Phil, for the lovely recitation of that prayer of Pope Francis that really says it all. Now, I was asked to use this time today as a summary of what we've been talking about in the last few days. And so I have chosen to do it rather than just putting up some slides to summarize what we've been doing, as to put it in the context of theological hope. And hopefully, it will lead us out now to recommit to those things we're already doing, to our being, and to what we might do together with others in the future. So I am going to screen share just briefly. There we go. So I've entitled the session Going Out in Hope, and hopefully that is together. We finished yesterday by reflecting a little bit, or at least yesterday afternoon, on the significance of the imagination, that great gift of God of which St. Ignatius spoke, that it is indeed a gift of God. And so what we're going to do now is to play a lovely rendition, an ecological rendition of John Lennon's Imagine, just the music. And during that time, I'm going to ask you so we can have some more participation, given this is our last morning together, and it's been so beautiful being together. I'm going to ask you during the playing of that music, simply to ask yourselves, what could I imagine, given the context of our world now? But what could I imagine? What could we imagine together as we contribute to the fullness of life to which Christ called us and to which the whole of creation calls us for healing? So over to Donna to play the music. Thank you, Donna. I'll get out of the screen share so you can use it. There. So let's just take a moment of silence after that beautiful rendition of Imagine, said in the forest, not too far from here, incidentally. And let's imagine. Imagine that new world to which we are called, in which we are called to participate with one another, to participate with all the creatures that God has given. What would it look like? So perhaps because it's always so good to hear one another's wisdom and voices, I'm just going to ask for a few comments that may have come to your heart and mind during that short reflection. What would it look like? What do you imagine it could look like? So over to you for a few moments. So I invite you just to share a few of those reflections, please. We had some great and lively responses yesterday, so let's see if we can repeat that this morning. What would it look like? Sorry, Patty.
One thought was just a cessation of the destruction of the rainforests and other lands.
Thank you, Patty.
For me, I was thinking my return to the mother house and to walk on the grounds of the mother house. It has been such a gift to me, the trees and the beauty of the garden and the squirrels and the snake that Pat picked up in here, you know? And so when you said hope, I thought, yes, there is thing. I come from Arizona where I didn't have trees and it was really dry and had its own beauty. But to come here and to see the birds and the trees, I want to thank the Mother House staff for the care of our yard. It is really beautiful.
Thank you. That's a beautiful comment too. Thank you. Anyone else in your imaginings? Yes.
And by the way, this is Janet, who you were looking for yesterday. I've been in the auditorium the whole time.
Janet.
I find myself imagining what would it be like if we together or in our individual hearts as well, ask what is the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth in the moments when we are making decisions, whether it's as simple as what kind of shampoo we want to buy, or as complicated as a direction for the future of the community. and everything in between. What difference would it be to bring those cries to the table in decision making?
Thank you very much, Janet. Thank you. And I'm glad we found one another on screen.
This is Jean Ann at the Mother House. I was imagining everyone working together to build simple homes out of repurposed materials instead of tearing down our forests. Build these simple homes for the homeless and the neighbors, fixing up their neighborhoods and bring beauty back into our world.
Thank you very much, Gina. And I had a lovely example of that where I did my novitiate in Boston. And a beautiful example of one of Boston's ministries where the sisters opened a house in a very, very poor area, an area largely comprised of immigrant neighborhoods and people just starting out a new life in the US. They realized too that importance you've just mentioned of these beautiful, keeping the neighborhoods beautiful. And I think once a month on a Saturday morning, some of the people who came to the house for the sisters' services, mainly teaching English, they joined together with the little local Buddhist temple, and the garbage collectors would drop off at the door on the Friday before it, safety gloves and special bags. And together, the Buddhist temple and the local neighborhood with the sisters would go around and clean up the neighborhood. And then they joined together for a lunch at the temple. And that was a lovely example of what you've just suggested, Gina, and that I saw when I was a novice. Yes.
This is Joe Foy at the Mother House.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Sister Mary. So part of what I see whenever I have this kind of imaginary time, I see domes and tiny homes of different sizes. I see property laid out using permaculture principles.
Mm-hmm.
So you have zones of activity. Usually you have some areas that are you might say just for beauty, kind of like the way Lyle does your garden out there, where you've got vegetables in one row, you've got flowers in another row. And then there's going to be water. There's going to be creeks going through, or the utilization of waterways that attract different kinds of wildlife and birds and insects. And so you have these opportunities for everyone to contribute to their food production, to maintaining the environment, to maintaining the beauty, as well as enjoying it. And then some in one of those tiny houses or domes, or it could be, have y'all seen these container buildings? So they take these big shipping containers and turn them into offices, turn those into cottage industries, just almost a Hobbit-like bringing in anything that can be useful and then rehabbing it for the use that we want to make of it. And I always see all kinds of people in this community, whether it's moving into an immigrant community and creating these spaces, or whether it's taking something somewhat new and rehabbing it or reworking it so that we have multi-generational community, and we have all kinds of families, people with mental health issues, people with disabilities, people who are overeducated like me, people who are undereducated and can do all those things I can't do, like take care of the vehicles and redo the bikes. I see all of that. And specifically using those images, I was seeing that old growth forest that got denuded. Move what I just said into that space that just got demolished by the timber company, You know, we would come in with our cars and our vehicles and our everything and just take that space over, and redo it, if you will. And I know, I realize that's probably not possible, but it's what I imagined. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that beautiful mosaic of a community of creation.
Imagine if we could swing the pendulum to a greater love of one another and of the planet.
Thank you, Christina.
This is Judy at the Mother House today. Actually, Joe Foy said just about everything I had in mind, but I'll say it a little differently. When I watched Imagine again, all I could see were more green spaces everywhere.
Yes.
Green spaces in cities, places of beauty, grass, flowers, trees, gardens. In the rural areas, I have a great desire that we reinvent how we eat. That we, and even around the big cities, that we would have large community gardens where people could come for their produce. Here, that we could buy farm eggs, farm meat, milk, all of those things that connect us to the geographical, biographical area where we're at. And I agree with Mary Fran, the beauty of this place is heavenly. Green
Thank
space.
you. Thank you so much. Daniel, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I think maybe you've heard that life follows art. And so a lot of times it takes an individual or collectively, people will do something that gives everyone else that aha moment. And for instance, a community garden, or let's say a rooftop garden on top of one of these tall buildings, people see something like that, and then it starts to spread. You could take a city like Detroit as an example of a city that really went downhill, but it took a few individuals who led by example and with their imagination created ideas of how we can fix up this city, how we can restore it, and actually not just make it what it was, but make it even better, where we can live more as communities and we can help the poor in the process because they can all share a community garden. That's what I think of when I think of imagination. I think of what I call true progress, where you actually are not just building for the sake of building, just growth for the sake of growth, but you're actually doing it for the betterment of humanity.
Thank you, Daniel. And that corresponds with the little chat that Christina put in about development in cities. And speaking of art, are they bison that I see behind you?
Yeah, that's it's a photographer that lives in Kansas near Hutchinson, and she takes her photos and stretches them on a canvas. So I really made that my centerpiece for the home. Everything else when I remodeled, I try to bring those colors into it. So
beautiful. Yes.
Sorry for the distraction.
No, not at all. No, it was just what you said, that art too. Those of us who are artists, what we can do to sort of promote this beauty in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, thank you for those beautiful commentaries, the beautiful imagination. And doesn't that begin to give us hope immediately? That's what we seek. We seek a hope in order to move forward, and imagination helps us to do it. So I'm just going to switch back to screen share. And what a lovely job you did of saying, what might this look like? And we continue to ask ourselves as we discern, how is it inviting me and us into the future? And again, you've given those wonderful practical solutions. And one of the things that I was asked, both Marcia and Betty Suter, when we had a conversation, was to begin to also think not just about the abstract theology these few days, but also to look at some of the practical things. And it's been wonderful listening to you all for some of those practical comments. And I chose, because it was Sunday morning, to have a little bit of lightness here with imagination and hope, and these wonderful statements. Albert Einstein, imagination is more important than knowledge. And we do know the facts, as I said yesterday, but we need more than that to move us to the moral imperative. The imagination is more important than knowledge, because knowledge is limited. And sometimes it can stymie hope in us, can't it? Especially at the present time. The important thing, Einstein said, is imagination has the capacity to encircle the world. And then a beautiful statement from George Washington Carver: where there is no vision, there is no hope. And so perhaps our first step is imagining, envisioning. And the lovely one by J.M. Barrie in the book Peter Pan, this is the Disney version of it there on the left: the moment you doubt whether you can fly, you cease forever to be able to do it. And so part of this is about looking at the rich resources, as we began these days, those rich resources that we have both in ecology as a science and in our faith tradition as it has evolved. From the beginning to today, it's always progressively evolving and giving us great possible gifts, springboards, as we said at the beginning, to how we might move into the future. And when we think about it in terms of a faith context, I recall in a totally different context, in fact, quite a good number of years ago, I was involved with some research in bioethics, pediatric bioethics. And one of the members of our research group, many were physicians, and one of the members of the research group was Sister Nuala Kenny. And Sister Nuala, some of you may have heard her speaking. She's done quite a lot on the sexual abuse crisis. But Nuala she's originally from the US, and she's from Long Island, and she is a doctor and a bioethicist. She's retired from medicine now. But Nuala and I were on this pediatric research committee looking at end-of-life care for children and, of course, care for their parents. And one morning, it was a residential meeting we were having, and one morning, Nuala and I had breakfast together. And I remember us sort of reflecting on some of the very practical issues about end-of-life care. And Nuala said to me over breakfast, "Mary, what difference does resurrection make?" And she bemoaned the fact that even amongst Christians, very often resurrection in those tragic circumstances means nothing. And she said, we really need to recover reflection on the difference that resurrection does make as we look towards the choosing of new life that these days have been about. And when I was researching, doing some research and trying to think what pieces to tie in to this session, because obviously, as I've said, we could have spent a year, you may not have wished to, but spent a year on each of the topics. But I found this really beautiful comment in an article written in the Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature and the Environment about the poetry of the African-American poet Lucille Clifton. And you know, it resonated when I was reflecting on hope. Especially hope in these times, which are times of tremendous pain across our world, in our own countries, excuse me, and across our world. And Marta Verbanowska, who wrote the article, says this of the poetry: the same poems that reveal and often tremendous pain also offer a sense of unbreakable hope that comes from self-love and affirmation. Remember, very much when we look at the materiality of ecology and eco-theology, we also have to remember that call to love ourselves as God loves us. It comes from self-love and affirmation. And here some of your comments reflected this, as well as joint action, communal consciousness to which we're all invited, and the understanding of the supportive potential of religion and nature. This transformative, our sense of conversion we were talking about yesterday, relational spirituality, which we've been talking about, particularly in the first sessions of Clifton's poetry, invites a reading of her works through the prism of Black eco-theology. Again, the voices that have often been so marginalized need now to be heard. Or a religious approach that emphasizes the interconnections between human spirituality and liberation, environmental awareness and activism, and the special role of the Black population in these processes. So just as we spoke of the indigenous voice, we speak also of other voices, in this case, the Black voice, that brings to us tremendous wisdom. It brings to our faith tradition a tremendous wisdom that we haven't always been prepared to listen to. And so I found that that encompasses much of what we've been talking about: the interconnectedness, the need to hear all voices, the call to come together. And this is one of the beautiful poems called "Won't You Celebrate Me" with Lucille Clifton, from Lucille Clifton, which I think really epitomizes much of what we are looking at as we move forward in hope. And the poem is beautiful. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up. Here on this bridge between sunshine and clay, my one hand holding tight, my other hand, come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. If we read only that poem, I think it would have embraced much of the sentiments that you have shared of what we've been trying to look at during this institute. And notice some very significant things in the way that Lucille Clifton writes. She doesn't use a capital letter for herself, perhaps because the many ways in which her value has been and beauty has been diminished, but perhaps also an invitation to us to remember that we are not at the center of the universe, as we said on the first day, that we are just part of this whole beautiful, alive creation. And then the hope that is in that. Something has tried to kill me and it has failed. As we stand between starshine and clay, as Lucille says, as we stand between starshine and clay, this is our moment not to fail further. And the clay we know so well, do we not? The clay of our times. We only have to look at our news in the last few days to hear of that. COVID is still rampant, and in some areas, in some states, it is increasing again. The terrible flooding that is going on in Europe, across Germany, Switzerland, Belgium, dreadful flooding, more people being exiled, as many more are across the world, because of environmental disaster. Probably it's, and most people have attributed it, that environmental disaster to climate change. The famine that goes on across our countries and the intense poverty. And with that increasing violence, we hear on the news now of the increasing stronghold of the Taliban once again in Afghanistan and the threat to many people. Violence and poverty and environmental destruction going hand in hand. The cry of the poor and the cry of the earth are one. The forest fires that are raging along the west coast of both of our countries, that's the clay of our day, to which Lucille referred in her poetry, the clay. And as we know, clay is something that can be shaped and reshaped, spun anew on a wheel, to create the most beautiful containers. And so perhaps clay, again as the poetry and as Hope tells us, is that ability to reshape this container we call our earth. And so Starshine then speaks of that unbreakable hope. What does it mean, as Nuala asked me, to take the resurrection seriously? What does resurrection mean in our practical lives? What does it mean in our hearts as Christians? What does it mean as Easter people? We're called to be people of starshine or unbreakable hope. And we're not alone. When we try to, even from a religious perspective, when we try to bring ourselves to choose that new life through our identification of faith and ecology, to which these days invited us. We're not alone. All the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, cast us as humans as guardians of the natural world. Humans, as we said yesterday, as vice regents who are representative of Yahweh, God, Allah. And we find that in the rabbinic commentaries, especially on the works of the Hebrew scriptures, in the Quran, and in Christian commentaries on Genesis 1 and 2. Can we come together as people of faith, as well as with others? Can we come together? Can we look to initiatives to come together so that we can together become hope in our world? There are many initiatives that we can do from an interfaith and ecumenical perspective, and simply by joining with others. So that identity in faith is important. And note here, guardians, that word guardians is a result of some of the scriptural analysis that's gone on with that word that we started with that became a stumbling block to so many, dominion. Dominion, when we understand the dominion of God, even if we were to use that word, when we understand the dominion of God is a benevolent dominion, one that makes us guardians of all God's creation. And we do that together. And again, by listening, as I said, to the indigenous and diverse cultural voices. I couldn't resist this since it was Sunday morning, the cartoon. I've always valued the church's contribution to ecology, Vicar. I think I have to make a scarecrow in our garden looking like that. Because Christianity actually has offered us a tremendous understanding of hope. Hope is one of the great theological virtues to which we're invited, and how difficult it can be at the present time. And those other virtues that accompany that great theological virtue of hope are temperance and humility. That is an invitation to temper my behavior, an invitation simply to temper my behavior, our behavior. How do I temper those appetites? How do I temper my desire for convenience? How do I work with others to temper, to balance the kind of industrial residential developments that go on in our cities? How do we temper that? As both Christina and Daniel said this morning, how do we temper it? How do we balance it? How do we, as we've said over the past few days, look at what we learn from nature as the limiting factors, those very limiting factors that remind us that we have to share, remind us of living a lifestyle that doesn't impede other people's rights, doesn't impede the rights that we spoke about of the environment. You know, do other creatures, does the environment have a right? Pope Francis seems to think so. And I suspect, as I said in that particular session, those rights of the environment are something to be further explored. As Andrew Lindsay, the Anglican, as you would say, Episcopal, the Anglican theologian in England, looking at animal rights, John Berkman here at the University of Toronto, also looking at animal rights, and based, of course, on some of those early values expressed by the wonderful Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was killed by the Nazis in the Second World War. And also, as we saw right at the beginning, St. Francis becomes the model for so many Christians. And as I say, people of other faith are willing always to go to Assisi because of that respect. The fact of the recovery of the agency of all creatures. On the first evening and second day, we spoke of a new Christian anthropology that took us away from that extreme anthropocentrism in which we have lived and in which much of our faith tradition has also been forged. We looked at the subjectivity of each part of creation, the moral agency, the kinship of creation. That is the recovery of the agency of all creatures, as expressed in that beautiful Franciscan spirituality that we began to look at, and also expressed in those great values of the principles of the universe, gifted to us by the scientists of our day, and of course, our own reflections on the significance of Trinity, unity and diversity, the ability to come together to work for this, the very presence of Trinity within the whole of creation, the significance of biodiversity, the very fact that without diversity, there is no life. And so the need, a call, as we said, therefore, to address the whole issue of the loss of species at the present time. And so those Christian contributions of hope that I hope that we have had conversations about in these past few days, a moral regard for the neighbor, and extending to other regard that expansiveness that we're called to today, that other regard for the whole of creation. What we in the family of Joseph would call expansive, inclusive love and respect. And a progressive extension, which Walter Brueggemann has said, of the circle of neighborliness to a growing range of the other. Increasingly, we are called to expand our range of love and respect, and to understand creation and our part in it more fully. And of course, the ethical responses to the stranger, so articulated in the parable of the Good Samaritan, And that is a wonderful one for us to do some more reflection of, scriptural reflection. That great parable of the Good Samaritan, ethical responses to the stranger. And again, it reiterates the session in which we talked about the historical Jesus and his teachings. We talked about the great significance of the parables through which Jesus taught us, always using, or not always, but in large part, using the natural world to describe what our behavior should be. Listen to the animals and they will tell you, as we heard in Job. And so that great parable of the Good Samaritan that calls us to ask again and again, who is the stranger? Who do I make strange to me? It breaks down boundaries between cultures. A huge part of our ecological invitation today to break down those barriers between cultures. Between citizen and refugee, we learn also. And how does that impact us today? I don't know if any of the Concordia community, but I know many of our communities have had sisters at the border at the present time, that whole refugee image. And of course, when we look at the state of the world, the fact that there are so many environmental refugees. And the Good Samaritan parable also teaches us that we respond locally to the person we find laying at the side of the road, to the piece of land that we find destroyed. We respond locally in order to have an impact globally with humans and other creatures. So it's a lovely, lovely parable to use for perhaps some explorations of the significance of the New Testament, as well as the Hebrew scriptures, for our rethinking ecologically. And of course, I think as well, the Good Samaritan speaks to us of the presence. There is a huge hunger for presence in our world, presence both to creation and to one another, as your lovely examples of imagination and hope have expressed this morning. And there have been, of course, great contributions, as we've seen, trying to trace the trajectory of the Christian tradition. Great contributions we saw in the historical church, in the medieval church, and also, interestingly enough, at the time of the Industrial Revolution, we see some of the great Protestant leaders, Calvin, for example, speaking of an excessive human influence in cities, which he said reduced the capacity for them to reflect the glory of God. De Chardin, whom we've talked about, moving us to reconsider that whole expression of evolution everywhere, in every moment and every situation of life. The marvelous work of biblical exegetes. I used the modern one, Jose Pagora, a beautiful, beautiful book on the historical Jesus, but Walter Brueggemann's great biblical exegesis on not only the land, but hope. The Protestant theologian Karl Barth, speaking of Christian redemption as a distinctive form of ethical life that must be expanded to creation. And interestingly enough, Karl Barth, at his practical best, says that if we truly looked at that, it would lead us all to vegetarianism. Now, I don't know if everyone wants to go that route, but we have spoken about the possibility of some of our older traditions, like the tradition of fasting during Lent, being addressed to the ecological situation we find ourselves in. Fasting from energy use, fasting from meat one day a week. And so there are ways that can move us there. And then the wonderful contributions of Jürgen Moltmann, Kathleen Lacuna, Yvonne Gabara on the Trinity, how the Trinity is, if you like, a precursor to much of what we think about this community, the whole community of creation. The significance of the Trinity for us understanding those great ethical principles too, those great principles of science that have been revealed to us, diversity, interiority or subjectivity, and communion, the Trinity writ large in the very being of creation. And then, sorry, I made a typo there, but and we listened to the voices of some of the feminist theologians, Sally McFaig, Elizabeth Johnson, who've spoken of not just as Calvin did a long time ago, reducing the capacity to reflect the glory of God, but have gone so far as to say that ecological destruction and disregard for others wounds the very body of God. And so that movement in the ecological program to deep incarnation, to understanding what that deep incarnation means as a form of hope. And then our own leaders, Popes John Paul II, Benedict, and Francis, with the greening of the Catholic magisterium, that movement towards expanding the teaching of the Church, particularly the teachings on life, and particularly the teachings of social justice. And then the Great World Council of Churches moving us to sustainable culture and therefore sustainable goals for both humans and creation. And Michael Northrop in Northcott, a Protestant theologian who speaks of ecological hope in a new publication simply called Ecological Hope, says this about that great contribution of the Christian churches. He says there has emerged in subsequent decades a remarkable range of environmental activism in both Protestant and Catholic churches and some Pentecostal churches and religious communities. Among the earliest pioneers of faith-based ecological activism, he says, were Roman Catholic women religious communities in America. We led the way. These were a crucial precursor to the greening of the Catholic magisterium under Pope Francis. Another crucial pioneering religious locus was the World Council of Churches, whose general assemblies from the 1960s onwards began to address the big earth-threatening questions of nuclear weapons, global warming, biodiversity loss, and the environmental exclusion of indigenous peoples. Michael goes on to say, perhaps the most influential feature of the World Council of Churches' engagement with ecological concerns is its role in originating the idea of sustainable development through its program, Justice, Peace, and the Integrity of Creation. JPIC was launched after the World Council General Assembly in Nairobi, at which the Australian scientist Charles Birch first coined the phrase, a sustainable society. And that is the hope that we have. We find it in science, as we've said, we find it in our faith tradition, and this all gives us hope now to become ourselves people of hope. But in these difficult times, we sometimes need to find hope itself. And Michael continues, I argue, living as if the new ecological future of peace between humans and other kind is already here, and seeing the modest influence of new practices in transformation is a crucial source of hope that change is coming, that it already works, and that it will come more broadly. We need to spread that gospel too. In a more theological key, he says, this is the essence of Christian messianism. And so this is what it is to be redeemed, as we said in Romans, because the whole of creation is groaning. But this is our hope. We've been given hope by the people on whose shoulders we stand, and we become hope as we are called to do in Christian living. And of course, sometimes it is difficult, isn't it? And so I wanted to finish with this beautiful poem many of you will know by Wendell Berry, The Peace of Wild Things. When we ourselves lose hope, when despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free. That beautiful poem gives us hope. When we despair, let's move to what we were speaking about yesterday, to that beautiful gift of contemplation that will give us hope and lead us to action. So thank you. I'm aware that some of you are going to Mass. It has been a huge privilege to be with you. Regrettably not in place to see those beautiful grounds in Concordia. And I have to add to spend an evening talking to Marcia. I had the beautiful privilege of being in Le Puy a couple of years ago for a retreat with Sister Janet Mock. And I took along, Marcia, your beautiful commentary on the Maxims, which inspires me ecologically too. And I have to confess that after a whole week of retreat in Le Puy, unless anyone doesn't know, the place we were founded as Sisters of St. Joseph, I never got beyond the introduction because it was so magnificent and it taught me so much. So I hope one day to be able to come and have that evening chat, Marcia, and I hope to see you all and to meet you all. And it's been a huge joy to be with you. And so we go out in hope. Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. You can see us a little bit, I think.
I can.
If
It's
you get
wonderful.
your-
It's wonderful. I can see the whole assembly.
Yeah, you
And
must
thank-
have opera glasses on.
Well, I can see little, I wouldn't be able to identify you individually, but you have gifted me enormously with your presence and all your wonderful comments. So thank you.
Okay, let me thank some people here also. Want to thank the Ecology Committee. Those of you who provided the prayers in the morning, Janet, Judy, Carm, and Christina, thank you very much. They were beautiful. All of you who participated on Zoom and here. The Mother House staff, your hospitality, Carmen, Mary Jo, easy transitions, the cheerful accommodations of the sacristan, Jean Ann, and Susan LeDuc, our phenomenal technician over there at Manna. Susan, you did a magnificent job.
Mhm.
And you've recorded it, and we know that you're going to be sending out the resources that were promised. So thank you so much. And then our helpers here, our techs who were on deck all the time, Jan McCormick here and Lauren Harbin with Susan. Thank you very much. And of course, Donna over there in Canada. So thank you so much. And a word of warning, Anthony Gittens, who likes to be called Tony, will be here in person next year, 2023, in mid-July. So be prepared to receive that notice and put it on your calendar. So Mary Rowell, I don't know how we're going to thank you adequately, Mary. You have been a true thought leader. you're obviously a born teacher and you've got that caregiver background that stuck out very clearly. You have the marvelous ability to integrate concepts into an intentionality and direction of heart. And what was interesting to me, at least personally, was that your presentations model the see, judge, and act model. And they seem embedded in your mode of presentation. So thank you for that. It was subtle.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you.
And you led us gently. That's what people were saying. She's so subtle. She's so gentle. And disciplined thought, obviously, invitational heart processes. You pursued us doggedly and deftly. You are a sly one, Mary. And I think we followed your lead eagerly. People were excited about it. They showed up. They were grateful and they said, when can we have her back? And so we're glad that you're willing to come back. And we do hope to see you. And we thank you for the renewed and the new lenses that you provided in so many ways in which to decenter ourselves and place ourselves in our true place in creation, among creation. So thank you for new and renewed lives and new ways to find God in all things with glad and practical cooperation. Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And thank you to all of you.
Okay. No, we hate to see you go.
Yes, I'm going to miss you all.
Yes, definitely. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.